So good evening, everyone. My name is Chinmayi, and I work for International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology, iForest. I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for joining us today and making the time. We are going to release our report on the legal assessment around coal mine closure today and looking at and discussing what we feel will be a very critical issue for just energy transition in India. Just to give a brief context, this is the second in our two-part series of legal assessment. Prior to this, we had released a report and had a discussion around the decommissioning of coal-fired thermal power plants. That report is already available on our website for anyone who would like to refer to it. Now, what I'm going to do is just before we start off with the webinar, I'll run everyone through the agenda briefly so that there is a bit of context of how the evening will pan out. We are discussion around the decommissioning of coal-fired thermal power plants.
There is some audio problem.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So today we will first set the context for the meeting. Context setting in the welcome address will be by Chandrabhushanji, who's our president and CEO. This will be followed by a brief presentation on the report, just to take everyone through what the report is all about and what the critical issues it raises. After that, we'll have an address by a special guest, Ms. Santosh, Coal Controller. We'll move on from there on from 5:30 onwards towards the panel discussion to discuss in detail the regulatory aspects of just transition. We are very lucky to have a diverse panel. We have a good representation from the coal mining industry itself, from civil society and legal experts, labor, etc. So that will be our panel discussion, which will be about 45 minutes. This will be followed by the keynote address by our chief guest, Shri Anil Jain, who's the Secretary, Ministry of Coal. He'll be joining us, and it'll be followed by the release of the report. So without much ado, I think I'll ask Chandrabhushanji to take on and deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Chinmayi. And what I have a small presentation that will set the context for this meeting and why we did this report. But first of all, let me thank all the panelists and special guest and chief guest who have agreed to participate in this important meeting, as well as thank all of you to join us at 5 o'clock India time on Thursday evening. The holiday season is going to kick in. So if you are participating in this meeting, you are interested in this subject. So thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule and join this meeting. So let me just, share my presentation with you on why we did this report. And then I'll request Shrestha to present the findings of the report. I think the first, the context setting point for all of us is to understand the status of coal business in India, coal mining business in India. Now, there are certain statistics which is very important. The first statistics is that actually 3/4 of India's coal is produced by a limited number of mines, maybe about 50 mines. In case of CIL, Coal India Limited, which is the largest public sector coal producer of the country, about 75% of CIL coal comes from just about 35 mines, large mines. Now, CIL is thinking about increasing coal production to about 1 billion ton from about 50 to 70 high-yielding mines in the future. So the target is to focus on large, utilize the economy of scale and produce coal from large mines. And in that context, CI is also thinking about closing unprofitable mines, and there are large number of unprofitable mines, and I'll come back to the statistics on unprofitable mines very soon. Now, it is important to understand that any unplanned closure of unprofitable mine has huge implications on environment, people, and workers. And therefore, if we plan closure of unprofitable mine in a much more deliberative fashion, it is good for coal companies because coal companies are losing money from unprofitable mine, which they will not. Community is going to gain because there will be transition of community and new economic opportunities can be developed. Workers will get training and maybe different kind of employment in different economic activities. And we can do proper closure of mine to save the environment, to regenerate the environment. So a well-planned just transition is going to be very, very important for unprofitable mine. Now, as you can see, there are three categories of mine we think is primed for just transition right now. One is abandoned mines. And I will again come back to the number of abandoned mines that we have in the country, coal mines. The second is end of life mines, mines which are going to close in next 5 years, whether profitable or unprofitable. There are a number of mines which are again at the end of their life. And then there are a large number of unprofitable mines. So these three categories of mines will be something that we have to look very carefully in the next 5 to 7 years. Just to give you a sense about how many mines we have, it has been a very difficult data collection process for us, but we have used RTI and every public document to collect this data. So in the 7 states for which we have data for about 358 mines, we have collected data, out of which we have financial data for about 305 mines. Of the 305 mines in 7 states, 199 mines are unprofitable. Only about 106 mines are profitable. So 2/3 of all the mines for which we have been able to collect data is unprofitable. And we believe this trend will hold true for rest of the mines as well. So about 2/3 of the mine in many states, as much as 70% of the mines are unprofitable. For example, West Bengal, if you see, we have data for only about 63 mines, out of which 48 is unprofitable. West Bengal, which is the mines are largely run by Eastern Coalfield Limited. So the statistics is that close to 2/3 of all the coal mines in the country is unprofitable. What about abandoned mines? Now, this data we got from a parliamentary response to the Rajya Sabha, and as you can see, the Ministry of Coal has given us statistics about 293 mines, coal mines in the country, which is abandoned and discontinued. Now, we do not understand the status of mine closure of these mines. How the abandoned mine has been defined? What is the status of mine closure? So this disclaimer is very important. We are not making any judgment. There could be few abandoned mines where some sort of mine closure has happened, but there could be large number where nothing has happened. So that needs further study. Now, if we only look at unprofitable mine, and that's what our research has been, then how many workers we are talking about? How many workers are working in these unprofitable mine? Again, we have used RTI, RTI to get this information. About 100,000 workers, and this is only departmental and contractual worker are working in these unprofitable mines, for which we have data, which is about 30% of all the formal worker working in the coal industry. So 100,000 formal worker, which is largely departmental worker and contractual worker. Okay. But if we look at informal worker, and we have done district level study, then this number we should increase by at least 150,000 to 200,000. So that is generally our estimation is that for every formal worker, there's 1.5 or 2 informal worker working in the coal industry. So we are talking about large number of workers that we will have to deal with if we plan to close unprofitable mines. How much land? Again, the land is huge with unprofitable mine. If we added up the lease area, and it is about 137,000 hectares, which is again about 1/3 of the lease area with coal companies. So we are talking about vast amount of land which will be available for closure and repurposing if we plan to close unprofitable mine. And therefore, we have to plan for 137,000 hectare of land. A large amount of land is in West Bengal, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh. Okay, more than 30,000 hectare in all these 3 states. So we are talking about large number of mines, large number of workers, and huge amount of land as far as unprofitable mines are concerned. Now, it is in this context that we started looking at what are the legal provisions on land, labor, environment, and finance to achieve just transition of unprofitable coal mines. That's the context. And the context becomes equally important because Ministry of Coal is in the process of developing a mine closure framework and a comprehensive mine closure framework. So this work becomes equal, then it becomes even more important because it's an independent assessment of what is the current status of our policy and regulation on achieving just transition in coal sector. So what we have done is we have looked at large number of laws related to labor, environment, finance, and land with respect to coal mine. We have looked at key limitations that are there in these laws, and then we have outlined a reform agenda in these laws to attain a just transition. That's what our research is. And now I will request Shrestha to present the findings of the research report. Thank you. Shrestha, please.
Yeah. So thank you, CV, for the context setting. Actually, it makes the issue less controversial as we're discussing regulations related to coal, but which is a very realistic one, considering the status of unprofitable abandoned mines that are remaining. So to give a sense of how we sorry. Yeah. I'm not sure there's some problem with the copy. So basically, this is the review approach that we have followed. And we have focused on, largely the focus is on assessment of India's laws and regulations that are related to coal mine closure, environmental management, land and labor. But before we did that, we also looked into the global situation. Like, is the India situation very different from what is happening globally? So there has been an extensive review of laws and regulations that are practiced by various countries, as well as looking into some of the frameworks that are being proposed by international agencies. But to complement the regulatory review, we have also looked at case studies, basically to what's happening in the ground. Are there any legal disputes that are arising out of it? And then to substantiate our own research and observations, we have actually discussed with a large number of stakeholders and experts, including many of you who are part of the discussions today, because this is a nuanced issue. It's not a black and white issue. So, and to also understand the limitations in the laws and to see how we all can think through the process going ahead. So that constitutes the base of this assessment. Now, I'll keep the global observations very brief because what comes out is that mining is largely perceived mine closure as an environmental issue. And that's the reason most of the laws related to closure are coming either from environmental laws or related to mining laws. But in many of the countries, in fact, there are mine closure plans which are mandated as part of the mine development process. But the challenge that is the comprehensiveness of these plans. And there is an assessment that has come out in 2021 by IGF of 30 countries across the world, major coal economies, which is showing that there are limitations in the ways these plans are dealing with environmental and ecological issues, economic issues, as well as the financial assurance that are provided under this. And this is becoming a challenge now as we are planning a transition. However, the good news is that there is a clear recognition that mine closures going ahead must also deal with economic aspects and social aspects. And therefore, the way it is approached currently under the environmental and mining laws, it requires a much comprehensive look, and a much comprehensive regulatory framework needs to be developed to address the issue. Now, what many countries have started doing is, who have decent environmental laws and mining laws to guide the closure mechanism, they've started aligning with the idea of just transition, which is essentially making it stronger on aspects of labor and socio-economic processes. Just to briefly touch on Germany, we all know this is well discussed. The way Ruhr was able to support a just closure of mines was not because just of the good mining laws or environmental laws, but also strengthening the labor laws, such as the Mining Co-Determination Act, which is very important, which gave essentially workers equal voices, industrialists, to understand how closure can happen. And in 2020, the country has come up further with the Coal Exit Act and the Structural Development Act, which has put renewed emphasis on worker transition and structural development aspects of the coal regions. Now, not always these laws are comprehensive. They are coming as per the time, but also the country's general socio-economic fabric has also helped in the transition process. There are some other examples which the report touches upon, but also I would turn a little bit to international agencies which are now coming into frameworks. And one of the most comprehensive framework has been proposed in 2019 by the International Council on Mining and Metals. What's interesting in this framework, it is saying that mine closure process is a mean to support social transition, essentially. And therefore, you just don't need a mine closure plan. You also need a social transition plan to complement it, if we are now looking into the idea of a just transition. And therefore, it has emphasized on comprehensive planning and designing processes, both with respect to environmental and social issues, and allocating adequate finances for it. That is what the global scenario is largely emerging right now. Now, from this, we looked into in depth the regulatory landscape in India, which is the focus of the report. And if we look into the India scenario, it is not very different, because most of the laws currently guiding environmental closure, responsible closure of mine is related to our environmental laws or the mining laws. And this is a host of laws we have looked into, which are the fundamental environmental laws of our country: the Air Act, the Water Act, the EP Environment Protection Act, the Forest Conservation Act, the Mineral Conservation and Development Rules, and guidelines, notifications, etc., developed under it. Now, what distills out of this assessment is that the environmental management process is largely as part of mining operations. So it is assumed that mining companies will comply by the conditions as stipulated under this clearances, consent orders, mine closure plans. However, the challenge is that there is a lot of duplicity in these conditions under these various consents, permits, etc. Similarly, there is a lot of duplicity in who is monitoring it as well, because these permits are granted by different authorities. Now, coming to closure, the problem is that there is nothing very specific on how environmental compliances or environmental management practices will be monitored and who will do it. For example, the mine closure guideline is specifying that there is a 3-year monitoring period that is necessary to monitor air and water management issues. But the problem remains who does it. And I've been talking to state pollution control boards. They remain extremely unclear, though they monitor the consent orders when mining operations are going on. The other challenge is that there is no obligation for undertaking an environmental risk assessment like we do an environmental impact assessment when we open a mine. Now, if a mine has good closure practices, good management practices throughout its life, it's not a problem. The problem arises if you have to do environmental remediation and what quantum it has to be done. So that assessment, there is a clear gap. Coming to the land-related laws, the biggest question with land is that it becomes essential for repurposing. And for repurposing, the determining factor becomes who owns the land post-closure. Now, the overarching law, which is the centerpiece legislation with respect to coal mining, is the Coal Bearing Areas Act, which was enacted in 1947. Now, when Coal Bearing Area Act was enacted, we never thought of a process of this transition at that point. So the Coal Bearing Area Act, under specific sections like section 11 or 12, it remains a little vague on for how long a lease is being given or what will be the process of handover when the mines are closed. And this creates an ambiguity. Now, the government of India has taken cognizance of this, and therefore reforms are now happening. And particularly reforms have come in the past 3 years. The mine closure guidelines of 2019, for example, said that the reclaimed land must be surrendered to the state government upon obtaining a final mine closure certificate from the coal controller organization. Similarly, the mineral concession rules were amended in 2021, saying that a coal mine will now be given for a 50-year period, and those given early on will be deemed to be given for a 50-year period, post which the land must be given back to the state government. The Ministry of Coal also issued a notification on the heels of this amendment in October 2021, specifying the exactly same clauses. Now, this is related to coal mining land as governed by these laws. But there is another challenge with coal mining land with respect to forest land, because a lot of forest land gets diverted for coal mining. But what happens is that the status of forest land doesn't change. It stays as a forest land. And once mines are closed, that land has to go back to the forest department. Now, when you have to do something new activity for repurposing, which will be essential, you will have to get a new clearance. So if we put together the CB Act and the Forest Conservation Act provisions together, the challenge becomes that in absence of a clear mechanism of land transfer and a lot of amount of land going back to the forest land and requiring fresh clearances, the repurposing process is likely to get delayed. And repurposing is an essential component of economic diversification as mines are closing, and we are planning a just transition. There is another problem with the land issue is about the comprehensiveness of the closure plans and the costs of closure that is there. Now, in India, we have a uniform cost rate for closure of open cast and underground mines. For open cast mines, it is estimated at 0.9 million per hectare. For underground, it is 0.15 million per hectare. Sorry, 0.15 million per hectare. But then the challenge is that this is not site-specific, which might vary a lot as per regions. The bigger problem right now, as we are facing in the next 10 years, we might face is there is no differentiation between these rates for new and legacy mines. While the legacy mines will have far bigger challenges of closure, considering that there are big external dump areas, the reclamation is challenging because they have not followed the progressive closure process because the guidelines were not there at the time. Poor soil and water management practices, and all these are there. The other problem is that it does not, and this is a process evolving, it as of now does not capture the process of just transition or social transition. The costs as determined are largely taking into account the issues of technical closure and biological reclamation, but not preparing the land for repurposing and socio-economic benefits. The third crucial aspect of the regulatory review was labor laws. And the government of India in 2020 now has undertaken a labor reform, essentially amalgamating all the 29 labor laws into 4 labor codes. And this is a process. It has been enacted by the center, but now states need to develop the rules. But essentially what it stands is that the labor laws are very clear on the retrenchment conditions, essentially how if an industrial facility closes, including coal mines. And there are preconditions specified for it, which is like a 3-month notice, largely for mines having 300 and more workers. If it's less, it's a 1-month notice period. But essentially what it means is, and then Coal India Limited itself has its standing orders under the Industrial Employment Law. But the challenge, what it says is it's easy for a company in that way to retrench a worker, but it may not be so favorable if you consider how workers will react to it. So this is the caveat right now. The Industrial Relations Code is not varying too much in terms of what the Industrial Dispute Act had, but what it has brought in some good provisions such as for reskilling fund. So essentially there's an opportunity to build on these codes further. The problem that exists is particularly with contract and informal workers. And this is the large section of the workforce of the coal industry. And the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act, which of 1970, which has now been subsumed within the Occupational Safety, Health and Worker Conditions Code, is not differing very much. It deals with contract workers' security, benefits, etc., when they're in the tenure. But the problem happens, it is not designed to provide social security compensations and reskilling in the event of a closure. Here is the gap. Now, social security benefits actually have been improved for the informal workers. Again, this is something we need to further focus on how it moves. The Social Security Code, which has now been brought in 2020, is actually providing social benefits to the informal and unorganized worker. And this can be an important issue for the coal industry. There are 2-3 things which has been specified in the code. It is talking about developing a social security fund, which will be actually the money will come from various welfare schemes that will be developed by the central and the state governments related to these workers. A social security board will be constructed at the state and as well as the national levels. And finally, there will be establishment of career centers to provide worker support. Now, these are good provisions that if materializes can be helpful. For formal workers, particularly the departmental employees of the coal industry, the benefits are much clearly specified, particularly under the Coal Mines Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act. And the most important provisions under it is the pension scheme. Now, this pension scheme is a unique scheme because it actually provides for both departmental and contract workers. But unfortunately, what happens, and this is a discussion we had, the Coal Mine Provident Fund Organization, CMPFO, is that none of the contractual workers are fulfilling the 10-year pension period, 10-year employment period with one company to get the monthly pension benefit. So when this company, what this contractual workers end up getting is a lump sum when they leave the work. Therefore, the thing is to go ahead and think of long-term contracts to actually avail these benefits. So that is the thing with the labor law. So basically, if we look at the regulatory aspect, it is to summarize that the laws and regulations that are currently existing with respect to land, environment, and labor are not really designed to support a just transition. There are some good measures which we can build on, but it requires much more closer look and reform. The absence of guidelines for transfer of coal mining land post-closure and also repurposing, it's a huge challenge right now. I mean, the Coal Bearing Areas Act, there is a disconnect between the way the coal area provisions under the CBA Act as well as the subsequent notifications. The financial resources are inadequate, of course, because they're not meant for community, they're not meant for labor, and most importantly, not preparing the land for repurposing. Vagueness on monitoring of environmental conditions during the closure process, and also who does it. Is it the SPCB? Is it the CMPDI? Who is it? Who is going to do it? And finally, the labor laws need to be strengthened, particularly on retrenchment provisions, compensation, and transition support, looking into the worker distribution of the coal industry, not generic, which is again contractual and informal workers. So what we have done is, at the end of the report, we have proposed a reform framework, particularly highlighting some of the key aspects that requires immediate attention with a broader objective, because if the objective is clear, then we can keep on developing what reforms are necessary. So there are 5 key objectives that the reform agenda is looking at. First is we need to ensure timely transfer of land available with coal mining companies, because unless this happens, then the repurposing opportunity, which is a huge, opportunity to develop economic opportunities for the local community, alternative industries bring in, cannot happen. And you will go by the same process of acquiring virgin lands, social alienation, everything will crop up. So it's the best use to make use of this land. The second thing is we need to maximize repurposing potential of coal mining land by focusing on design. How do we close? Improving the closure plans, and the report discusses that also. The post-closure environmental risks and hazard needs to be minimized. It is important because many of our coal mining areas are critically polluted, and the legacy mining areas have problems of air pollution, water management, soil management, which becomes important. And then we can come to the discussion of who pays for it. That's a different question. Labor rights and welfare becomes an important issue because there will be risks. There is a case study actually in very detail in the report of Chhattisgarh, which highlights the court case around it. And finally, we need to ensure a balanced social transition. So there are four reform agenda, around 4 issues we have designed the reform agenda, and I'll briefly touch on the main issues. Number 1 is that we need to now think of amendments to the Coal Bearing Areas Act. I mean, the MMDR Act was in fact amended to, bring in District Mineral Foundation to ensure community benefits. Now we need to relook into the Coal Bearing Areas Act, which was enacted in 1957, and how it can synergize with the 2021 notification and the mineral concession amendments. The recognition is there. We also need to develop a comprehensive mine closure framework, taking into account of land repurposing, minimizing environmental risks, ensuring remediation, and of course, social transition. And then we need to develop set of guidelines and frameworks to ensure reclamation and repurposing of abundant mine land. It is a huge issue, as CB said. 293 is not a little number, and there can be more. There are reforms we have highlighted with respect to minimizing environmental risks and hazard, and this is more on the governance side we have spoken of, particularly to develop a governance mechanism to have dedicated officials to monitor environmental conditions during mine closure. Because the duplicity of conditions and the duplicity of who does it often lets things fall through the cracks, and that has happened with many of our environmental laws. The second thing that needs a relook is, of course, to the Environmental Protection Act itself, to insist on mechanism to understand environmental risks so that appropriate remediation measures can be taken. Now, this may not be applicable for all mines, but certainly old mines that will be significant. We also need to look into reforms of labor rights and welfare. And as I said, the 2020 reform has taken into, but it is not really targeted to the issue of coal workers. So there we need more specific deliberation. Huge opportunity lies with revision of the Coal India Limited Standing Orders, which is aligned to the old laws. And then more importantly, it cannot be always an end of pipe solution. We really need to minimize the informality by hiring workers through proper contracts and to give a longer term contract so that benefits can be availed, because our benefits are often tied to a term, you are in service. So that is very important. Short-term contracts do not help to avail benefits, even if the law broadly specifies that. And finally, we need to specify provisions for informal worker wages alongside contract workers, because in coal industry, the unions play a huge role in negotiating wages for contract workers. But on informal workers, when we did an assessment of informal worker, in fact, earlier in April this year, and the informal worker wages are highly negotiated if we looked into the wages that are fixed by the joint committee of the coal officials as well as the coal unions. Finally, we need to develop and implement a social transition framework aligned with the Just Transition Goals, because we are now designing a closure agenda aligning with a win-win situation for the environment, for the community, as well as for the workers. And this framework can include provisions for community sensitivity, economic diversification, skilling and reskilling, communication with local communities, which becomes a huge issue, and how to engage stakeholders in the process. And finally, one of the key questions for our country always remains that we need to secure the financial resources to implement it, because laws are only fine in paper unless you have the means to implement it. And I'll stop at that, and we can take further discussions with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrestha. I would now request Santosh ji to please deliver the special address. Ms. Santosh has joined us. She's the coal controller, Government of India. So Ms. Santosh ji, can you, over to you now. Ms. Santosh, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, but I have already requested Shrestha that I won't deliver any special address or something like that.
Just a few words. I mean, we are aware of it, but just like a few opening lines would do. That's okay.
Yeah, the report prepared is a nice one, and the Ministry of Coal is really making efforts regarding comprehensive mine closure of the mine. And I would like to tell you that we have done a exercise for this mine closure as well, wherein we have divided the mines which have been closed. Like in the beginning, the speaker has said that there is no definition for abandoned, discontinued and closed mines. The Ministry of Coal has already defined these kind of, has given the definition for the abandoned, closed and discontinued mines. And it is working on this. And out of that, in this regard, we have found out almost around 200 mines. We have divided these things into two parts because you may be aware that this mine closure guidelines, especially prior to that, the mine closure used to be a part of the mine plan only, but focus was not given on the mine closure activity. After that, in the year 2009, Ministry of Coal issued clear-cut guidelines stating that all mines have to open an escrow account with the coal controllers organization for incurring the mine closure cost. So that agreement was executed between the coal controller, the bank, as well as the mine owner. So we have found out that prior to 2009, so there was no escrow account and no fund has been earmarked for this closure activity. So Ministry has now given direction to Coal India Limited as well as its subsidiary to make a plan for the closure of these mines and find out the estimate for the closure activity. So I would like to say that Ministry as well as Coal India and other coal companies like Neyveli and Singareni all are working towards this aspect. And now it has this economic aspect, socio-economic aspect for the closure activity has also been included in the framework of comprehensive mine closure. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we are a little ahead of a little pushing the deadline a bit, but I'll open the panel, like I'll request Mr. Bhushan to open the panel discussion now. We will be having a much more in-depth discussion from and hearing from various stakeholders on the issue. So over to you, Mr. Bhushan.
Thank you, Chinmay. We actually have, all that we have discussed in this report. One, that the integrated fashion in which we have looked at land, labor, finance, and environment has actually opened the scope of the work. We generally have a tendency of looking at things in silos. So as an environmental organization, we generally look at only environmental issues. And if you are working on tribal rights and forests, then you will look at land. And someone will look at finance and someone will look at labor. I think the time has come, if we are looking at addressing some of the core social challenges, that we look at all these aspects together. And I'm really happy that in this report we have done that, and as well as in previous report, which we did for thermal power sector. We have 4 very good people to talk about these issues. We have Mr. Abhijit Sinha. He is General Manager Environment at Central Mine Planning and Design Institute, CMPDI. Abhijit knows how to make mine plan and mine closure plan. So if you want to understand mine closure plan, you talk to Abhijit. That's how it is. He understands the environmental aspect of mining. This is how we will talk to Abhijit about mine closure plan and the financial aspect of mine closure. We have SK Pal, who is Director, Project and Planning at Southeastern Coalfield Limited. Mr. Pal actually looks after some of the biggest mines in India, coal mine, in Korba, for example. So he understands the intricacies of all the aspects that we have talked about, of just transition, social transition, of mine closure, environmental issues. We have Kanchi, who is a senior researcher at the Center for Policy Research. Kanchi is a very old friend. We have worked on environmental field for decades now. So we both are old. Kanchi, she has done a lot of work on environment, but also on issues at the intersection of environment and development and forest. So Kanchi will be able to tell us more from, that intersection that happens between environment and other aspect of coal mine closure. And lastly, and not the least, we have D.D. Ramanandan, who is General Secretary of All India Coal Worker Federation. If you want to know about coal worker, coal labor, you talk to him. So we have got excellent panel to discuss these issues. And let me start considering the time limitations, a 90 minutes program. So I will request all four of you for five minutes opening remark, 5 to 7 minutes, not more than that. And then we have a lot of questions that people have already typed in. And then I'll come back to you with these questions. I hope it is all right, right? Okay, so let me start with Abhijit. Abhijit, please focus on mine closure. How do we improve environmental aspect, financial aspect of mine closure? Your intervention. Thank you.
Basically, what we know about just transition, it is made out of two words, just and transition is justice and change, you may call it. Now coming to mine closure plans. It was first decided in 2009 to make a mine closure plan by the Ministry of Coal. And from 2009 onwards, in 2013, there was a slight change in that. Now the latest change was in 2020 May, in which few things were changed. The amount of the escrow amount was changed. Initially, it was 6 lakhs rupees per hectare for open cast mine and 1 lakh rupees for underground mine. In 2020, it was changed to 9 lakhs for open cast mines and 1.5 lakhs for underground mines. This escrow account, as we may call it, is you may call a security deposit. It can never fulfill the total amount of money required to close a mine. The amount basically required to close a mine is many times this amount. Now, there is also a change which has to be take place in the CBA Act. Now, last 3 years, some changes have been carried out in the CBA Act, but still other changes can take place. Now, washery or CHP can be put up in that reclaimed land. Railway sidings can be put up in the reclaimed land. Resettlement projects can be done in that. Thermal or renewable power projects, what I call coal gasification and chemical can be done, plants can be put up. But for just transition, these are big industries. These do not cater to the local population as such. For just transition, you have to put up small industries which can take care of their needs. See, for a coal mine, open cast mines runs for about 40 to 50 years, and underground mine for nearly 75 years. So 2 to 3 generations of workers, of people are based on that area, and their livelihood depends on that. So when one fine morning somebody announces that this mine is to be closed, there is going to be a hell lot of social unrest there. Mine closure as it is now caters to environmental aspects only. Now, the social aspect has also in this mine closure plan. That has to change. And on that, I rest my case. I give it back to the panelists, other panelists for their comments.
Thank you, Abhijit. Basically, the point you made was 2 points which came out quite clearly. One, that while the government has recently allowed setting up of some kind of industries under Coal Bearing Area Act on mining land, we have to think about also the people when we are setting up these industries. So maybe we have to think about a smaller industry which will employ a large number of people rather than only thinking about big industries. That's one point.
That's the point I want to make.
Okay, and the second point you made was that we have to think about the social transition much more clearly.
Yes.
I just have one question to you, Abhijit. Because you work on mine closure plan, we have looked at about 45, we have done an assessment of 45 mine closure plans. And what we found was that the way mine closure plan is designed right now, about 50 to 60% land is either internal overburden dump, which is of sizable height, or water body. The amount of undisturbed area or reclaimed land on which you can set up things are only about 30–40%. Okay. So do you think there is need to improve mine closure plan to get more area where repurposing can happen?
See, the water body, as you say, is a very valuable asset for us. India is a water deficient country, so we should preserve this water body. We are facing a shortfall of land. So any internal dam is going to be at certain height above the local area, basically. But there are methods to make that land productive too. We can do what I call your agriculture there. We can put up orchards there. We can grow cash crops there for the people of that area. We can also put up small industries, as you said, to cater to the need of the people. A vast amount of jobs can be created if you put in small industry, number of small industries. So there is no problem that due to the elevated land, there is going to be a problem in these. Okay. The elevated land can be planned out. It can be made flat, and other industries and other setups can be done there. Due to the shortfall, again stress, due to the shortfall of the land, there is going to be a certain height difference between the local area and the reclaimed land. Okay.
Okay. Let me now move to Mr. Pal. Mr. Pal, again, from your perspective as someone who is closely working on coal mine area, how do you see the legal reform and regulatory reform aspect?
Good evening. Thank you, everybody. Let me first congratulate Mr. Chandrabhushan for this nice report for recapitulation of all the related issues at present, which is linked with just transition. Really, the land policies, the environmental policies, and social security, you have integrated and taken a good report for this. Thank you for this nice effort. The issue is actually the present legal framework of mine closure. It is only relating to physical, biological reclamation of land, restoring of environment within the stipulated standards and all. Now, in my opinion, time has come to rethink beyond this present legal framework of mine closure. Repurposing of land, resourcing, reskilling of people engaged directly or indirectly, as you told, 1.5 times people are engaged in indirect resources through contractual activities. Restoring the GDP of the area with better use of land, other resources, infrastructures, and a low carbon intensive industries. These are all important issues. Actually, we have to think now and go beyond the existing provisions of mine closure activities. Definitely, coal ministry is looking towards it, and we are already in some sort of exercise how to repurpose the land and how to have a proper mine closure and have a equitable return to the society as well as the people working there. But similarly, I will give a very small example what has been done in Korba. Actually, it has gone unnoticed sort of thing, because initially Korba started with 2 underground mines and 1 open gas mine. Just 689 hectares of land was taken for underground mine and open gas mines. It was Madhya Pradesh, and through MPLRC, that is Madhya Pradesh Land Revenue Code, the land was acquired. And by 1980, the mines were started in 1950s, and by 1980s, the mines were closed. You will surprised to know that in 2003, out of that chunk of land, 486 hectares of land was identified and returned back to the state. The present Transport Nagar, what you have seen in Korba, I think your people have seen Korba. The present Transport Nagar is entirely established on those mining areas which underground mining has already been done. And there are huge infrastructures, huge malls, marketing places, and houses and hotels in that area. So that was a thing which has been already practiced in Korba, handing over 400 odd hectares of land back to the state. And they have repurposed the land, and now the whole Korba township, that Transport Nagar, the new township, is on that land. So we have done a lot of things in our areas also. The whole issue is concentrated on that, because whatever the coal fields we are operating in Coal India, because of the demand of coal, suppose one mine is getting closed, the other mine is getting started. So the people are getting resettled in a way, this way or that way. We have never interested any of our employees. Similarly, the indirect employees are also getting migrated from one place to another in the same coal field. So, making this story short, because coal is not out. Coal is not out of the scenario of energy mix in India. We have definitely have a huge ambition of renewable energy, but in this energy basket, the contribution of coal fire boilers is now nearly 80-83%. It will definitely come down to 20-24% by another 30-40 years. But the quantity of coal which is to be mined to sustain this energy requirement will definitely not come. Now we are mining 1,000 million ton of coal, and we'll be mining another 1,300 million ton of coal, 1,500 million ton of coal per annum in the near future to come. Coal is there to peak around 2045 or 2050, and this our national target of net zero by 2070 is definitely a huge task which the government has taken in hand. So, as you have pointed out, there is a necessity of changing the regulatory provision of handing over of the land under CBA, repurposing of the land, making this mine closure more wide, and getting the social fabric involved in it. This is like greening the area with low carbon economy, but a equitable settlement, and the society should be definitely benefited, and people should be engaged through other means, and employment and their social benefits are to be there. So definitely there is a necessity of a change in the present guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pal. I'll come back to you. There are a few questions that I'll ask you, but before that, let me go to Kanchi and for your remarks, Kanchi, please.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this fascinating discussion, and also for this really brave attempt to do a report like this. I think it was it was extremely needed. I think lots of these questions were being asked about what kinds of legal reforms would be required. So I think it's a huge effort for all of you to put it out and also engage a much wider network of people. I think your presentations raise some very important questions. What I'll just try and do in the next 5 minutes is think about trying to contextualize it a little bit. I do have your specific questions, which we can get to later. But I think I just wanted to contextualize this in the light of how we even understand some of these legal frameworks from its genesis. So, why were these legal frameworks actually why did they even come into place? And I think this is very important, especially in the light of some of the remarks that have come so far in understanding that if coal is here to stay, and if you're looking at designing some sort of legitimacy through the transition process, for coal mining, it's important to actually step back and see where this is coming from, so that we even understand how much we can push it with respect to the legal framework. So I think one of the things I wanted to flag is that, and I think I'll be happy to discuss it with everybody, is that most of these laws, whether it is environmental, land, forest, are largely, supportive of ensuring a due process and safeguards before initiating mining. So, you actually put in place these safeguards and during the course of these mining operations. There is actually underlying assumption in most of these laws, including the land acquisition laws, forest diversion laws, as well as the environmental laws, that the issues of ownership, rights, all of these kinds of issues, especially when it comes to individual owners from whom the land has been acquired, would be resolved before initiating mining operations or during the course of the mining taking place. So, it is these questions you actually don't find in the legal framework at all, because it was never envisaged that the social will be part of a mine closure. It was largely a center state issue. So the land is, because land forests are either state or concurrent subjects, it was very much that. So therefore we are unlikely to find anything in these legal frameworks in the post-mining scenario. It's unlikely. So we can talk about tweaks to these to fit it, but I think most of these legal frameworks, including all the stuff that that has come in the presentations and all my fellow speakers have spoken about, is basically looks at mine closures as a technical managerial subject. It's not these laws are not designed to deal with it and I think Shrestha actually spoke about it in terms of even most of the mining and environmental laws are actually looking at these mine closures, and it sees it as a techno-managerial sort of thing that it can be fixed. So I think it's a huge challenge that we have in front of us. But I think in the light of this, we need to also keep in mind that the research and long-term research, I think, of a diversity of actors in coal geographies indicates that the assumption that we had that some of these issues will get resolved prior to or during the course of the mines actually remain even after mines are getting closed and their people are moving on. So you have, whether it is so I'll just post challenge and opportunity both. The challenge is that a lot of these issues of unresolved legal issues around acquisition, did the acquisition actually take place properly, or for that matter, what is the status of jobs, assurances, rehabilitation, or what are the new impacts that have come up, say because of compensatory afforestation, etc. These remain a challenge when you're doing closure, because it's not like it's a settled matter. That's what some research shows up. Now, the opportunity is also the fact that there are new relationships that have developed in mining areas. So people have developed new, people living in these areas, as well as coal mining companies have actually developed new relationships, say around use of water, contractual arrangements. Can we actually partner in climate mitigation plans? All of those kinds of things are actually present ourselves with an opportunity that if there are already existing relationships, how do we actually build on some of these things? But I think a legal framework that is designed largely for coal allocation and operations is not designed to answer questions of repatriation, ownership, repurposing, and just transition. So we have to be able to see what opportunities we have within the legal framework, and we'll have to also think of what more is required, and that I think that requires much more deliberation, because we're not even talking about issues of food security, health. These are big current questions that even in the social fabric of this transition we will need to build in. And I think this is why a startup discussion like this becomes important, because you need these kinds of framing discussions and nuts and bolts discussion at various levels to be able to bring in. I won't get into the labor aspects. I think the next speaker will be able to deal with it in much more detail. But I think I just wanted to flag this, because there is only that much we'll be able to stretch the existing legal regime. And we'll have to think of some things outside the box as well. Thank you.
Before you go, Kanchi, just something on looking at mine closure from environmental perspective and from regulatory point of view. What is the role of Pollution Control Board, for example? Okay. Should it remain with Pollution Control Board? Because it looks like that the coal governance, whether it is, CMPDI, Indian Bureau of Mines, they all also, coal controller, they play a very significant role in giving, say, final closure certificate. So what is the role of a state pollution control board in this?
Well, I think the law very clearly defines what the role of state pollution control board is. And I think the reason I raised the issue of a technical and managerial way of approaching mine closures is that part is important. That part is important in understanding, the scientific assessments the pollution control board would come in with, how you visualize, the closure process. So there is a role, but I think me and my colleagues have actually spoken about this, that we need to take it beyond institutions like Pollution Control Board, not necessarily to do away with the institutions, but actually develop new forms of partnerships, because the practice and the expertise of different institutions is different. You may not be able to achieve all of it through the pollution control boards, and that's why I think expanding it to third-party monitoring, whether it's partnerships with communities or with other institutions, I think it becomes very crucial to bring in those aspects. And I think diversity is what we really need. So it's not doing away with institutions, but bringing in diversity of approaches that becomes very important.
Okay, thanks, Kanchi. Mr. Ramanandan, looking at the labor issue, your comments.
Yes, I am not a legal expert nor a technocrat. So I will talk on the aspect of labor. First of all, I congratulate iForest for working on just transition and for publishing an important report on just transition for unprofitable and end-of-life mines. This is important contribution to the growing field of just transition. I also appreciate that you are involving unions in just transition discussion. This is something very much missing today at both Coal Ministry and Coal India level, or even at state government level. I feel without involving unions and workers, there will be no just transition. I look forward to such more reports on various dimensions on just transition. In my opinion, opening statement, I want to make 3 points. First, I will start with a point that is important to set the context for what is unprofitable mines. It needs to be clarified. What you call unprofitable mines is actually not unprofitable, except a few ones. It is unprofitable due to policy choice. ECL is the latest example. Average price realization is 231% over notified price through e-auction sale. I can cite mine-wise data to prove my point in other subsidiaries also. No mine will be unprofitable if pricing liberty is given to the companies. Perception of unprofitable mine needs to be changed. That is my first point. Second, today all the mine closure that happen is merely ecological restoration. It has no element of just transition or human transition. In various projects across Coal India, we just plant trees and then call it mine closure. What is required is a post-mining land policy use that takes into consideration local stakeholders, future livelihood, along with ecological restoration. What is new? What is the new livelihood will create when you close down a mine? The answer ranges from renewable energy projects, tourism, fisheries, farming, etc. This has happened in 1 or 2 places partially till now, but this is ad hoc. Second important component of this is stakeholder consultation. Throughout the process of mine closure, to create a post-mining future for local community and workers, you need to work with local communities and workers throughout the process. This does not happen at all. Coal India and Ministry of Coal treats mine closure as a purely technical topic, not involving humans who are actually impacted. This needs to change. It needs to become an HR issue. Thirdly, my third point is mine closure is an important strategy of just transition. This is one of the many strategies that are required to achieve a just transition. Ministry and CIL and state government need to think about a slew of strategies to create just transition. For example, where mines are closing, how can we diversify the district? How can workers be trained and in what sectors? You can only do this with the help of unions and workers. Unions know Ministry of Coal and Coal India is working with World Bank to create a coal mine closure framework for just transition. There is nothing just about this. This is top-down technical approach that the ministry and Coal India are taking. Unions and workers have not been consulted in the process. In my opinion, whatever framework will be created will not be a just transition, but an unjust framework. By not consulting and making unions as stakeholders in the framework building process, CIL has and ministry is sowing the seeds of an unjust transition. Unions in CIL are powerful, and if unions and workers are not consulted and made part of the process, there will be strong opposition on the ground involving the entire community and in and around the mines. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramananda, for your strong opinion on these issues. And I think all stakeholders have similarly expressed their opinion on how do we need to move forward. I think the 3 points you made are important. How do we engage everyone on the ground? How do we repurpose land? How do we make sure that environmental remediation is done well? So thank you very much for all your comments. Now we are reaching the last part of our program. And we have with us Dr. Anil Jain, Secretary, Ministry of Coal. In many ways, this research was actually in a way, inspired by my discussion with him almost 2 years back. 2 years back, Mr. Jain was discussing a roadmap for just transition in coal industry. And he said, we need to look at mines which are primed for closure. Let's look at what we can do around those mines. And so thank you very much, because this talk with you actually led to conceptualizing and designing this project. And we are really happy that you're part of the release function of this report. So to you, sir.
Thank you, Chandrabhushan. Good evening, friends. Let me congratulate you, Chandrabhushan, for some of this pioneering work that you are doing. And I think nobody is covering the width and depth of this issue amongst the think tanks or within the government as much as you are doing. And also a very impressive lineup, senior people from the technical background, policy people, researchers. So though I wasn't able to join in early, I was traveling, but I saw the report and I heard the last two speakers. Very useful discussion, very pertinent, but most important of all, drives home the point that this is a very sensitive issue. And at the outset, let me jump the gun and immediately make one statement which I'm very keen to react to. कि ये एक शुरुआत हो रही है और अच्छी सोच से ये शुरुआत है. कोल माइन क्लोजर, ये जो तीन शब्द हैं, कोल माइन क्लोजर, इसके बाद के जो शब्द हैं वो कोई नहीं सुनेगा. कोल माइन क्लोजर ही सुना जाएगा. और इसको लेके इंडियन ब्यूरोक्रेट्स, पॉलिटिशियंस, पॉलिसी मेकर्स, इन तीन शब्दों पे झंडा उठाने के लिए हम ही लोग तैयार हो जाएंगे. So the issue is that I took the courage, if I may say so, towards the fag end of my career here, कि इस पे कम से कम एक बातचीत शुरू की जाए. I had forgotten कि कब बात हुई थी आपसे. आपने बोला 2 साल पहले हुई थी.
2019 actually, sir, late end of 2019, just
देखिए
before.
मैंने September 19 में ज्वाइन किया था, तो this has been on the top of my mind.
Yes, at that point of time, yes.
So because within the government also, when I move these proposals कि इसको कम से कम देखा जाए, स्टडी किया जाए, तो immediately heckles उठ जाते हैं कि क्या हम लोग कोई विदेशी दबाव में आकर इंडिया की एनर्जी स्ट्रेटजी को कॉम्प्रोमाइज करने जा रहे हैं. तो मेरा सभी लोगों से अनुरोध है कि इसको बहुत ही सेंसिटिव हाथों से डील किया जाए. इस नई शुरू की गई कहानी को बंद कर देना बहुत आसान है और it will be very sad because this issue, I'm reminded, and Chandrabhushan, all of you have been very active in the pollution space. I remember once even the Prime Minister mentioned in a meeting that we have to be very careful about the environmental issues. He mentioned कि सिवा काशी के जो workers हैं, वो सारा साल पटाखे बनाते हैं. और without reflecting on the bona fides, suddenly एक कोर्ट का जजमेंट आ जाता है दिवाली के 1 महीने पहले कि इस बार पटाखे नहीं चलाए जाएंगे, और वो सारे साल की उनकी मेहनत खत्म हो जाती है. तो ये बहुत ही सेंसिटिव इशू है. इसको now let me come straight away to your report. Let me congratulate you once again, your entire team, and very good observations and recommendations. Let me come to the recommendations straight away. And 1 or 2 points I will update you, and some points I will give my reaction. पहला जो आपने कहा, reforming the CBA Act to issue guidelines regarding the term of leasehold and for land transfer. Just to clarify, the land which is acquired under the CBA Act is said to be under deemed lease. So the CBA Act places the land and the minerals therein in the hands of the President of India. So for CBA land, Coal India or anybody else, whoever is the beneficiary of the CBA Act, doesn't need to go to the state government to ask for lease. Now, leases are of two kinds: lease over the land, surface rights, and lease to the underlying minerals. So there is a deemed clause for both of them. But if the surface rights belong to a private person, then he has to be compensated. And even if it belongs to the state government, then they have also got to be compensated. So, and then those rights vest for eternity in the hands of the vesting company or the vesting government. As far as the underlying minerals are concerned, that is also vested immediately in the hands of the President of India. So, अब उस जमीन, उस एक्ट में ये कमी थी कि ये नहीं लिखा हुआ था कि when the land has been utilized and is no longer needed, then can that land be denotified? वो provision नहीं है. So many lands over the past few years which could be repurposed, they could not be returned. One good thing is that I think last year or so, 10 months back, we were able to get a cabinet decision on the repurposing or use of the CBA lands which are not required for coal mining. So which are either not required because they are poor quality coal or they don't have coal, or they have already been mined out. So still there is a policy glitch that if a land has been acquired for mining and it has coal deposits underneath, then you cannot repurpose it. So there is an assumption that you acquired it for a particular public purpose, you must put it to that public purpose. So crux of the story is that if it has already been put to a public purpose, if the coal has been extracted, or if it cannot be put to public purpose because it doesn't have coal, then we now have a very good comprehensive policy which has delegated the powers to the coal companies themselves. तो एक तो ये एक शुरुआत हुई है, इसको आगे और उसके यूजेस अभी भी एनर्जी से रिलेटेड ही हैं. तो उसको अगर कोई कहे कि मैं गोल्फ कोर्स बना लूं तो वो नहीं बन सकता है. तो बट अल्टीमेटली हो सकता है that if there are lands, let's say in Dhanbad region, which are close to the urban centers, and their site value could be extracted, वो शायद अभी इसके अंदर नहीं है, उसको देखना पड़ेगा. As far as your second recommendation is development of a comprehensive mine closure framework. Now, this is something on which the World Bank's assistance is being taken. तो इसमें क्या है कि जो हमारा जो माइन क्लोजर फ्रेमवर्क है, वो एब्सोल्युटली करेक्ट, सभी वक्ताओं ने भी कहा कि वो टेक्निकल क्लोजर है कि अगर कोई अंडरग्राउंड माइन है, उसका मुंह खुला हुआ है, तो उसमें कोई एक्सीडेंट ना हो जाए, सब्सिडेंस ना हो जाए, तो उसको ढंग से क्लोज किया जाए. लेकिन उसका जो ओवरबर्डन बाहर निकला हुआ है और जो रिवर स्ट्रीम्स को डाइवर्ट किया हुआ होगा या और कोई लैंड के साथ कोई छेड़छाड़ हुई है, उसको कॉम्प्रिहेंसिवली ठीक करके टू टेक इट बैक, रिस्टोर इट टू द ओरिजिनल शेप, वो प्रोविजंस अभी नहीं है. तो उसी तरह से ओपन कास्ट माइंस के जो वो भी डम्प्स हैं, उन डम्प्स को आप स्टेबलाइज कर दीजिए और वो डगआउट एरियाज वैसे के वैसे रह जाएं, वैसा ही फ्रेमवर्क है. तो व्हाट इज द वे टू हैंडल so that if life goes on for another millennia, then those areas are not left the way they are. I think that is something which we want to learn from the Western experience. And that is what the World Bank is bringing on the table. They are offering a loan, which the government is not yet sure whether it wants to avail of it or not, because it was thought that this knowledge will be translated through pilot projects. So if you don't want that money, you can just tell World Bank to give you technical knowledge. तो वो कुछ seminars or conferences और कुछ manuals बन जाएंगे. But if you want to go and implement 1 or 2 projects so that they become templates, that is a decision which will be taken in due course of time. तो ये आपका recommendation बहुत अच्छा है कि अभी का जो माइन क्लोजर फ्रेमवर्क है बहुत inadequate है और उसको मॉडर्न टाइम्स के लिए उसको ठीक करना चाहिए. जो आपकी 2-3 recommendations हैं, development and institution of a social transition framework. And I'll jump to the last one, the integration of provisions in the labor codes to strengthen. There can be no doubts about it that labor is the first casualty. Then comes the community which is all around. And their protection, और अगर उनका inclusion नहीं होगा तो word just उसमें फिर सही नहीं होगा. बट अभी जिनकी हमने बातचीत शुरू की हुई है पॉलिसी लेवल पे मिनिस्ट्री में और कोल इंडिया से, वो माइंस हैं जो कि 10 साल 20 साल 30 साल पहले क्लोज हो चुकी हैं. तो देयर इज अ प्रिजम्पशन की जो उसकी लेबर थी वो एडिक्वेट लेबर लॉस के तहत रिहैबिलिटेट हो चुकी है. सो दोज आर प्लेसेस व्हिच आर लाइंग अबैंडन्ड एंड आर अ हैजर्ड, बट प्रोबेबली द लेबर हैज ऑलरेडी either exhausted or labor has been utilized elsewhere and they've retired, etc. Because I know of no such labor which was rendered jobless because the mine closed. On the contrary, there are almost 150 odd mines, maybe more, in Coal India, where the operations are highly unprofitable. But because the labor has to be given employment, they continue to be employed. तो आगे जाते समय अगर कभी 2035 में 40 में कोई नई माइन कोई बंद हो जाती है, चाहे कोल इंडिया की हो चाहे प्राइवेट की हो, तो उसकी लेबर को अपनी पूरी लाइफ लिव आउट करने की अपॉर्चुनिटी मिलनी चाहिए. और अगर नहीं मिलती है तो फिर उसको उसका कॉम्पनसेशन मिलना चाहिए. दैट पार्ट हैज टू बी बिल्ट इनटू द न्यू फ्रेमवर्क्स दैट आर डेवलप्ड, एंड दैट इज हाउ द वर्ड जे विल बी जस्टिफाइड. जहां तक आपने एनवायरमेंट प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट की बात की है, उसमें जो ईसीज इशू होती हैं मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एनवायरमेंट से, वो उसमें काफी कुछ तो उन्होंने कवर किया हुआ है. बट चूंकि आज तक कोई माइन कोल कंट्रोलर के थ्रू शायद 1 या 2 माइंस फॉर्मली क्लोज हुई हैं, इसलिए ये आई एम नॉट इन अ पोजीशन टू इमीडिएटली से whether the EC framework has been taken to the logical end. Though we do review it from time to time, and Coal India's subsidiaries do place a state of the environment on the website for each mega mine and minor mine as well, जो compliances हुए हैं EC के provisions के. तो वो तो जैसे कि किसी फैक्ट्री या किसी और फैसिलिटी को EC मिलता है और उसकी EC की कंडीशंस की compliances का रिव्यू MOFCC करती है, उस फ्रेमवर्क में उसको और स्ट्रेंथन करने की बातचीत चलती रही है, तो कोल माइंस भी उसी फ्रेमवर्क में कवर होनी चाहिए. तो उसका डायलॉग भी हमको करना चाहिए कि क्या जो प्रेजेंट EC मैंडेट है, whether it is strong enough or not, and that can also be accessed from countries who have done a good fine job of it. We do hear कि जर्मनी ने बहुत सारी लिग्नाइट माइंस बंद की, बहुत अच्छा काम किया, ऑस्ट्रेलिया में भी अच्छा काम किया. So maybe we can learn from them and not copy them, but tailor make them to the Indian conditions. So these are my thoughts on your existing report and some of my own thoughts on the basis of the work that we have been doing for the past 2-3 years. एक तो क्या है कि legacy mines जो हैं, जैसे 2009 के पहले की जो mines थी, उनमें mine closure framework was even weaker. 2009 के बाद नया फ्रेमवर्क आया. तो 2009 के पहले की माइंस और 2009 के बाद की माइंस, so to my mind whatever regime is developed today has to keep in mind the earlier frameworks. You can't suddenly impose a cost on either a private fellow or a sarkari fellow, give them new framework for mines which have exhausted and which are no longer yielding any revenue. और जो नई माइंस अब खुलती जा रही हैं, as long as there is appetite, उनका framework जो है वो, when a new mine opens, you can provide a framework, so whoever goes into the deal goes in with open eyes. So there is this point I wanted to make. Second point was that your report is basically on the legal framework, a legal assessment. इसमें एक सोचने की बात ये है कि अभी तक की जो माइंस क्लोज हुए हैं वो बाय एंड लार्ज पब्लिक सेक्टर की ही हुई हैं. पब्लिक सेक्टर की माइंस से हम जो एक एफिशिएंट और सस्टेनेबल जस्ट फ्रेमवर्क चाहते हैं, उसके लिए अगर हम लोग लॉ न भी लाएं अगर हम लोग उसको पॉलिसी में बिल्डिंग कर दें, कोल इंडिया अपने बोर्ड से उसको अडॉप्ट कर ले और उसको बढ़िया तरीके से करे कि उसका जो खर्च आएगा वो कोल के प्राइस में बिल्ड इन हो, तो उससे भी काम चल सकता है। बिकॉज गवर्नमेंट की अपनी कंपनियों के लिए लॉ बनाने में कोई बुराई नहीं है। गवर्नमेंट कंपनीज ऑल्सो वर्क अंडर लीगल फ्रेमवर्क, but they could also be brought into in the intended course of action through a good policy framework. Number 3, who will pay for the expanded definition of just energy transition? This is the elephant in the room. Energy transition तो समझते हैं हम लोग लूजली, फॉसिल का जाना, क्लीन एनर्जी का आना, और किस तरीके से रिन्यूएबल को एंट्री दिलाई जाएगी, वो सब बातें हैं। तो ये एक क्वेश्चन मार्क है जिस पे काम करना चाहिए, बिकॉज कोल सेक्टर इज अ कैश काउ। वी ऑल नो दैट जीएसटी कॉम्पनसेशन भी कोल सेक्टर से आ रहा है, एंड रेलवे का जो पैसेंजर फ्रेट है वो भी इसी से आ रहा है। उसके साथ साथ सभी राज्यों ने कुछ ना कुछ लेवीज, कोई ट्रांजिट परमिट पर, किसी और चीज पे लगा के, तो कोल सेक्टर से अगर आप उम्मीद करते हैं कि वो इन डिफरेंट डेवलपमेंटल नीड्स को भी फुलफिल करता रहे और जस्ट एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन के लिए भी कर ले, तो एनीवे वी कैन डू इट, वी कैन किल द hen that goose that lays the golden eggs, and we just might do justice, we might do a service to the humanity कि उससे बड़ी जल्दी इसका पतन हो जाएगा और क्लीन एनर्जी जल्दी से आ जाएगी। इट कैन बी एन इंटेंडेड कोर्स ऑफ एक्शन ऑल्सो। तो ये एक चीज सोचनी पड़ेगी कि कोल सेक्टर को जस्ट एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन के लिए, जैसे कि आपकी पुरानी जो रिपोर्ट्स हैं कोरबा वगैरह की और दूसरी, उनमें आपने भी कहा है कि अगर वो 400 रुपया जो है वही इनको दे दिया जाए तो दे कैन टेक केयर ऑफ देमसेल्व्स, बट क्या वो पॉसिबल है? अच्छा, फिर फाइनल पॉइंट मेरा ये था कि अगर हम कहते रहते हैं कि $100 बिलियन प्रतिवर्ष कोपेनहेगन में एडमिट हुआ था डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज को डेवलप से आने का। अब हमेशा कहते रहते हैं हम लोग वो आया नहीं, मिला नहीं। लेट अस से कल को अगर वो देने को तैयार भी हो जाते हैं तो क्या हमारे पास फ्रेमवर्क्स हैं उस पैसे को लेने के लिए? वो पैसा कैसे लिया जाएगा? क्या हम सिर्फ ग्रांटों के बेसिस पर ही ये काम करेंगे कि हम कोई इसके अंदर डेट फंड्स भी इन्वॉल्व करेंगे? तो एक तो डेट फंड का बहुत बड़ा एक इशू है कि डेट फंड आर नॉट ओनली मेंट टू fill the gap in the funding needs, but they also are a means of raising capital, so that अगर कोल इंडिया के पास आज अगर 25,000 करोड़ रुपए रिजर्व है और आप कहें तुम्हारे पास तो पैसा है, तुम कर दो उठा के इसको, तो फिर जो उसकी फर्दर जो न्यू माइंस खोलने की कैपेसिटी है वो सब खत्म हो जाएगी। सो मे बी इवन फॉर फाइनेंशियल इंजीनियरिंग दे मे नीड लोन्स। वो लोन कौन लेगा? वो स्टेट लेगी, कौन लेगा? नंबर 2, स्टेट्स की लायबिलिटी क्या होगी और कॉर्पोरेट की लायबिलिटी क्या होगी? बिकॉज बहुत सारी चीजें जो जे में आती हैं, जैसे अब कोल इंडिया की अगर कोई माइन बंद होगी तो उसका हॉस्पिटल भी बंद हो जाएगा, उसका स्कूल भी बंद हो जाएगा। तो अगर उसको कंटिन्यू करना है माइन क्लोजर के बावजूद भी, तो यू कांट आस्क कोल इंडिया टू कीप रनिंग दोस फैसिलिटीज। कोल इंडिया चलो ठीक है, सीपीएससी हम लोग उसको कहकवा भी देते हैं, बट प्राइवेट सेक्टर थोड़ी ना करेगा उसको। तो और सिटीजन्स को हेल्थ सर्विसेज, एजुकेशन सर्विसेज देना वो स्टेट की जिम्मेदारी भी है। तो अगर ये जिम्मेदारियां माइन क्लोजर के बाद स्टेट्स को दी जाती हैं, तो देन यू सर्कल बैक टू द अर्लियर पॉइंट आई मेड कि वो जो फंडिंग लेनी है वो स्टेट को दिलाई जाए। अगर लोन दिलाना है तो स्टेट को दिलाया जाए। वैसे भी वर्ल्ड बैंक से, एडीबी से, इधर उधर से लोन्स, कोई वर्ल्ड बैंक का पॉवर्टी एलिवेशन प्रोजेक्ट, कोई स्लम प्रोजेक्ट, हेल्थ का प्रोजेक्ट, इन सब में गवर्नमेंट कुछ एक्सटर्नल कमर्शियल लोन्स भी लेती रहती है। तो this is another point. And finally, of course, which is again repetition of what I have said, what will be the expanse of the term just? Because अब क्या हो गया है कि just में आप सब कुछ ही अगर लोड कर देंगे कि वो जो कस्बे थे जो कि ओल्ड माइनिंग टाउन्स, उनको भी अपने को मैनेज करना है, वहाँ की स्ट्रीट लाइट भी चालू रखनी है, स्लम भी रखना है, पानी भी पिलाना है, स्कूल और हॉस्पिटल्स भी चलाने हैं, और वहाँ की जो सिविक कम्युनिटीज हैं, सड़कें हैं, सीवेज है, वो सब भी अपने को अगर चलाना है, और जो सोशल नेट भी देना है, पेंशन वगैरह देनी है। वी ऑल नो सीएमपीएफओ की क्या हालत है, एंड देन आपको उसको उनके बच्चों को या जो वहाँ वर्कर्स हैं, कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल लेबरर्स, आपकी रिपोर्टों में कई बार आया है कि जो कोल सेक्टर पे डिपेंडेंट मजदूर होता है उसमें से 20% ही फॉर्मल होता है, ऑलमोस्ट 80% इनफॉर्मल होता है, उसकी स्किलिंग भी करानी है, ITI भी चलाना है। तो ये आई थिंक इट्स अभी से इसका डिबेट शुरू होगा, और कौन सा इंस्टीट्यूशनल फ्रेमवर्क डेवलप करेंगे जो कि इसको इम्प्लीमेंट करेगा, इसी चीज को डिस्कस करते करते, फाइनलाइज करते करते, जिसमें जैसे बताया गया ट्रेड यूनियन की तरफ से कि रामानंदन जी की, उसको भी, लेबर को भी साथ लेके चलना है, एंड यूनियंस को साथ लेके चलना है, लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स को साथ लेके चलना है। एक उसकी कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग ही 3-4 साल में हम लोग डेवलप कर लें, तो जाके 2070 का नेट जीरो हम लोग कर पाएंगे, नहीं तो हम इसी में उलझे रह जाएंगे। And then let me congratulate you once again and all the fellow panelists who from their expertise added fine nuances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You have a habit of putting a lot more agenda on our table now, because all your last comments were.
I also get you the funding for it then.
Yes, of course. So the next few steps of work that we need to do, I think finance is the big area. We always thought that GST compensation cess is not the cess that should remain. I think that should be used in coal area itself. It's a huge amount of money. We are talking about 40,000 crore rupees at least every year, which is going from coal for GST compensation. And we have written about it, but nevertheless. So thank you very much. We will do a formality, a photo op with you and everyone for the report release. So Shrishta and whoever has the hard copy. So we will do a report release, and the final report will be made available to all of you very soon. So do you have the copy of report?
Ms. Santosh, could I request you to put on the camera briefly, if at all?
Yeah. Paul Saab, you should, anyway. So
We have only soft copies.
Sorry.
We have some copies only.
Chhattisgarh, Ranchi did not reach, but it will reach.
it will be
The
soon.
soft copy
Thank
with
you.
us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you. So we are at the end, but as most panelists and as well as our chief guest and Ms. Santosh also said, this is the beginning of discussion, frankly. This is not the end. We have only scratched the surface of issues that we are going to face as we start discussing closure of coal mine. But I think another point which Mr. Jan made is very important. These are sensitive issues. We should not be looking at this issue in a very cavalier fashion, simply because the possibility of misconstruing these issues, the possibility of distorting facts are very huge. The idea is that we need a transition. There are a lot of coal mines that are going to close because of techno-economic reason itself. There are a lot of mines which are already closed. So how do we do just transition for workers, community, and environment is the first starting point, and the rest will follow. But I think finance aspect, which Mr. Jan made, is a very important aspect. What should be the role of a state and companies in just transition is a very important aspect. Should companies be responsible for everything, or states have a role? That is again related to finance. So that is an important aspect. Our panelists have talked about stakeholder engagement. I think Mr. Ramanandan was very, very clear that involving community and labor will be the test parameter whether the process is just or not. Very well taken. I think Avijit and Mr. Pal was very clear on modification in the mine closure plan and how do we develop social aspect on those plans. I think very happy to hear that technocrats are also thinking from that perspective. So it has been an exciting 90 minutes, 95 minutes with all of you. So thank you very much. And we look forward to discussing this with you again in future. Thank you, Mr. Jan. Thank you, Mr. Pal, Kanchi, Mr. Ramanandan, Abhijit, Ms. Santosh, and all my colleagues. Thank you very much.